Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Big Bros podcast. My name is Ilan, and I'm joined by my lovely friend and co-host, Jeremy. How are we, mate?
I'm well, and just want to extend a big welcome to you guys. If you are new to the show, we'd love for you to get around us and give us a little bit of that 5-star rating there to help us grow even more. Welcome. We can't wait to get stuck into it again and have you guys on board.
What's the topic of today's episode, mate?
Well, today we're talking about rite of passages and whether rite of passages are right for you, because often we're led to believe that you need to be doing everything in your 20s. You need to be having that gap year. You need to be having that travel within your uni breaks. You need to be going to uni, and you need to have that career, house, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it is. You need to have it all sorted. And these are all the rite of passages that we're led to believe we need to have. And we're here to say some things maybe but otherwise, not everything is a rite of passage for you.
And just because it's not a rite of passage that's right for you now doesn't mean it's not going to be right for you in 5 to 10 years. And I think that's something that really needs to be emphasized. For example, you might be in a position where you're not finishing your university degree, but your mates are, and they're getting that first job. You might not be ready for that rite of passage, but they are. But in 10 years' time, you might be ready for the rite of passage of, owning your first home, whereas they might still be renting. So a lot of things in life tend to kind of even up or even out as the years go on and so forth. But I think something to kind of remind yourself of is understanding why you want to go through a rite of passage. Is it a rite of passage you want to go through because there's some form of intrinsic desire, or is it largely influenced by your surroundings? For example, parents, family, society at large.
Exactly. And when I think of even our friendship group, I feel like everyone's kind of done things a little bit differently. Some people are still studying, like yourself. Some people have been well into a few years of full-time work, and we're all the same age. And it's because people have just done things, I think, a bit more intentionally in our friendship group for the most part, which is awesome, and what we would love to see more of and be encouraged to see, because it's so hard to get caught up in locking in with your own life when we're so consumed with what everyone else is doing as well. And one thing that comes to my mind is, when we were finishing school and we were 18, 19, it was a thing that okay, you had to take a gap year, or if you didn't take a gap year, you had to travel in your uni break straight after school, and you had to go and do that traveling. Whereas I know some people and some in our friendship group that very much just enjoyed getting straight into uni, and they thrived in that environment, and they wanted to get cracking and finish up earlier with their uni studies, so then they could still then go and start working and then maybe travel later. So everyone's just got different priorities, which is awesome and how it should be. But we're so consumed with doing what we see everyone else doing, and that is fed to us from such a young age, especially as that 19, 20-year-old.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more people at uni nowadays than is actually necessary, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't go to uni, but I think I speak on behalf of a lot of people who might say that there's a lot of people at uni who would be better off doing a trade, or might be better off just doing some form of work that isn't really confining them to a lecture space and doing assignments and exams, because that's just not a good utilization of their strengths. I don't think I'd be a particularly good tradesman. My hands are probably quite soft, and as hard as I try, and as much as I try to callous them through weightlifting, it's never going to beat the calloused hands of
you're never going to have a brookie's hands.
Yeah, that's it. But you know what? Other people would have that endowment, and maybe not the hands, but the ability to think, and the ability to think on, okay, how do I problem solve in this sort of environment? And I think nowadays university is very socially admirable. Academia is something that's, it's well respected. So people want to go and get a degree. And look, truthfully, I think in a lot of ways it used to be easier, even for our parents' generation, because university used to be free, and HECS is always getting higher with inflation and so forth. So things are expensive, but I think just a lot nowadays, there's not as much of an emphasis on people pursuing trades because it's not as sexy, right? And I completely disagree. I think we need trades, and we need electricians, we need people doing carpentry and so forth. So I think that's one thing that I think of as well when it comes to rites of passages. Everyone kind of glamorizes one over the other. Another rite of passage that a lot of people, which is a great rite of passage and is important, is getting married. married. But I think people, instead of looking at marriage on its own as the rite of passage, having a big wedding is the rite of passage. And
they look at the party aspect more.
Yeah,
so.
and I think about that not necessarily from the aspect that maybe the bride and groom want a big wedding, but potentially the families paying for the wedding. They want everyone else to see how big the wedding is. And I look at those big celebrations and I think to myself, are they doing it for themselves or are they doing it to impress and show off to other people? And I think that's why we do a lot of rites of passages, is because we don't want to do it ourselves, but it's just to show everyone else that we're doing the socially admirable thing in life.
Same as when we were 21 and we were going to 21st, and the big song and dance is about, oh, did you get that Facebook event invitation to this person's 21st? And if you didn't, well, you better ask for a +1 and we better get you +1, because that is the thing that everyone is going to be going to. And you often ask yourself, well, do I even care for this all that much? Do I really even want to go? I don't even fucking like partying. I don't even like drinking all that much, but fuck, I better go because it seems like that is what everyone is doing. And that is the whole that is the whole point of this, is that, you know, being 21, it's the whole being and seen. It's where are you and it's being seen. And it seems like this is just what needs to be done. It is the rite of passage. If you need to have that 21st, you need to have that big F-off party and you need to be seen as that person. And this is where it's all wrong. And this is where we're fed to believe all of this in our early 20s. And this is where often people get caught up in not feeling like they belong and not feeling like they're actually in that environment of being around people that want to do things because they actually want to do things. They're rather in that environment of people that want to do things because the internet is telling them to do things as well. It's the same with traveling and taking that summer break to go over to Europe and, you know, throw your coin in the Trevi fountain and be in those sweltering European conditions. But you know what? You actually don't like being in those sweltering European conditions. You prefer actually going to Japan and maybe going skiing. But God forbid you do that in June, July. You know, you should be in Europe in June, July. So it's all about doing things because you want to do them. But realistically, we see these things as rites of passages just because Instagram tells us that they are, and TikTok tells us that they are, and the dinner conversations on the nights out and the bar conversations it's revolved around that. And it just feels so robotic at times. It feels so rinse and repeat. It's almost as if you've got nothing to bring to the table about what that typical rite of passage is at that age you're at. You almost seem like an outlier. And you might feel this way because you're still studying, for example.
That's a good question. Truthfully, I mean, I don't know. I think not. I haven't experienced that firsthand because I think a lot of the times I hang out with friends, I'm quite lucky in that I've got friends who are interested in what I'm doing. And in a lot of ways, although I'm studying, I'm really just at placement most of my weeks. So I'm essentially doing the work already without necessarily having the label of being a full-time worker anyway. So I'm doing the work of what I'm going to be doing next year, probably just with more supervision, but still quite a bit of autonomy. But I do get where you're coming from, because it is natural. If all of your friends are talking about, yeah, I've got to bloody get, you know, I don't have any leave, you know, banked up. And to me, I'm thinking, what the fuck is leave? Like, you know, accrued leave. All I'm used to is unpaid leave, because all my working contracts have always been on a casual rate because I've been studying for so long, so I haven't actually picked up a full-time job. So it's things like that feel a little bit foreign. But I'm also a massive believer of the fact that everyone's journey does look different. And if you know your journey's right for you, then you don't really get too much anxiety about the comparison game. Because I think one thing I've spoken about before on the podcast is that I've not traveled as much as I would have liked to. That's not to say I haven't traveled. I've traveled a little bit, but obviously if I was painting an ideal picture of how much I would have loved to, obviously it would have been more, but lockdowns didn't help, did it? And truthfully, I'm now near the end of my degree. So the next few years of my life, these are things I'm, you know, very keen and interested in incorporating in the next few years of my life, is doing a bit of that travel, but doing travel I want to do, not going to Europe like in 2019, because everyone's going to Europe. As you said, you know, it was cool to go to Mykonos. It was cool to go to Greece. And in a lot of ways, I'm happy I got that out of my system, but I want to go to some niche countries. I want to go to Peru, even though it's not niche, but I want to go to a country where it's not necessarily glamorized on social media, because there's a genuine desire to go there for the things that the place offers, right?
You mentioned something there about knowing what you want to do and therefore not getting caught up in the whole shtick of a rite of passage. But I think that's where we get confused, and a lot of people can relate to this in terms of that confusion, is that do I really know what I want to do for me? Because Instagram's telling me otherwise. My friendship group and other people I know are telling me otherwise. They're saying that, I should be doing this and I should be doing that. And it kind of plays with my belief as to, well, do I actually want to do these things? And it's almost like that devil on the shoulder situation when you think that you want to do something, but then you second guess yourself and ask, well, do I actually really want to do that? Because you've got all these people suggesting otherwise.
Yeah, there's Chris Williamson talks about this essay a lot. I forgot who coined or authored the essay, but it's asks, what do I even want to want? And I think that's a really cool, deep meta question, because we think we know what we want in life. But truthfully, are those things that we think we want genuine? Are they coming from an intrinsic place? Or are they, as I said at the start of this episode, are they coming from influences outside of ourselves, right? And I sometimes think a useful question to ask yourself is, in 10, 15 years' time, what would you want people to describe about you, about your character? And, if you say, I want people to describe me as a nice, kind, caring individual, but I also want them to describe me as someone who loved their adventure. Does that come from a place of intrinsic desire? You get what I mean?
Exactly. And I think we can also associate a little bit of risk with forcing a rite of passage. Just because other people are doing something, you feel like you need to do it. So then you go and do it, but you don't really want to. Well, there's actually a risk associated with that. The risk is that you've done something that maybe might be a little bit more premature for you, or you feel like it's just an absolute difference from who you are as a person. It is not in line with your character at all. You see people going to that party trip in Ibiza and you hate that and you couldn't think of anything worse, but you go and do it because you want the Instagram photo and you want that bar conversation to tell people that you did that. But then you regret spending the 15 grand that you did to go and do that. And you actually look at that time period with complete disarray. I guess the learning out of that is that you learned that you hate that. But sometimes we don't need to experience things to know that we actually don't like something.
Yeah, I even think about this in like a relationship context. People who've never had a boyfriend or a girlfriend and will just settle for someone because they've never had that experience. And that whole frame of thinking, I get it. It's like you want that experience, even if it's not with your ideal partner. But then you kind of end up resenting yourself through the process because you're like, why am I investing so much time and energy into a person that I'm not even sold on? And granted, you might be thinking, well, I wasn't going to marry them in the first place. They were my first partner. And fair enough. That's each to their own. But still, you should never force yourself to do something just to try and meet some sort of arbitrary goal or deadline. It's like we had that brilliant episode with Kate Bursky. Shout out to Kate. And she was awesome. She talked about those arbitrary deadlines, that society puts all these deadlines on us, especially in our 20s. And if we don't live up to those deadlines, we get this fucked anxiety and we get this sense of failure. And I think that you
haven't ticked off the things that you need to be ticking off.
Yeah, that's it. And I think in a lot of ways, the reason, as I said to you, I know I don't get anxiety because I'm in full-time work, because I'm in a degree that requires a lot of studying and requires a lot of education and training. And for me, it's not really something I think about in like a negative light. That's the trade-off I make. In a lot of ways, I haven't entered full-time work. That's fantastic. I don't have to tell my employers about, oh yeah, I need to go away for 2 weeks. Can I have, just that time off? So there's perks, there's trade-offs to everything, right? There's no perfect solution, only trade-offs.
Exactly. I was out last night. I'm recording at the time on Sunday now. We were out on a Saturday night and I was having a conversation with someone I went to school with that I hadn't seen in a while, and he was, just talking about what we were doing, what we're up to, and the conversation automatically reverted to studies and work, which, I'm always so critical of, or not critical of, but I always just think it's a shame that that's where we revert our initial conversations. Like, we could be talking about so much more, even if it's as simple as, just what did you get up to today? Like, just something a bit light like that. Anyways, the conversation reverted to, what we are doing work-wise and career-wise. And he was kind of saying to me, yeah, look, I'm still studying. I've got a couple years to go in this, and then I can start working. And I said to him, you know what, mate, like, there's no rush, because once you start working, you're just like everyone else. You're just like all the other people that have just been working, and essentially like you're just on level playing field again. You're in the rat race. You're going to be working for the rest of your fucking life.
Yeah, but what if he wants to? What if he's excited about that?
Exactly. If you're excited to do that, then by all means. But if you feel like you're longing for it just because you feel like you're maybe those 2 years behind other people in your position, and you just want to be there already so that you can say that you are working because you're ashamed to say that you're still studying, then that's just where it's a bit shameful, and that's the pity of the situation. And look, not to say that he was like that. I don't know what his beliefs were, but that's just where it led me to think. It's like, well, you know what? Don't think about what's gonna be happening in 2 years when you're gonna start working, because you're gonna be working for the rest of your life, and it'll happen for you when it happens for you.
Not to make this a personal therapy session by any stretch of the imagination, but that's a really kind of what you mentioned there. You longing for work because everyone's already working, or is it because you're going to accrue something personal? I ask myself that question a lot, to be honest with you, because maybe I lied a little bit before when I said, like, you know, I'm not as stressed out by it. I'm more so stressed out by the fact that, yeah, after a full day of placement, I have to come home and maybe do some assignment work, but then I idolize next year when I'm working and I don't have to worry about that. I can do something that I enjoy doing, maybe spending more time doing activities or hobbies that I may not have time to do now because I'm bogged down with so many things. And I always ask myself, is that because, you know, I ask myself the exact same question. Do I want to get into full-time work because all my friends are already doing it? And I think the answer is no, truthfully, because I think of like these tangible examples. So the reason I'm bringing this up is for anyone who is in that weird kind of period where a lot of their friends who are doing a commerce degree are spending 3 years studying and they're pretty much out, but you're doing maybe an eng degree and it's taking you longer. Ask yourself why you want to get out and finish already. Is it because you're just sick of uni, which truthfully I am. I'm sick of, it's been 7 years in a row. So I'm ready for that chapter to close. But I think it's an interesting thing to ask yourself, because a lot of times we think we want something because we believe we want it, but a lot of the time it's driven by something else. It's driven by social anxiety, I think, as well.
And look, love that insight from you, mate, and it's very true. And I can't really relate, honestly, because 7 years is nothing compared to the 4 years I did, and you're still going, so I can imagine how you feel there. But I think somewhere where, you know, a lot of people can relate as well is the rite of passage of either, you know, having a single phase in your 20s or being in a relationship. And you alluded to it before about getting into a relationship just because you feel like you should be in a relationship in your 20s. And if you haven't had that experience of being in a relationship and then you hit the age of like your mid-20s, all of a sudden you're a bit of an outlier. It's like, well, why haven't you had that experience? And, you know, that's something that I can relate to as well, because I feel like my first relationship was later into my mid-20s, and I didn't have that phase where I had that earlier relationship. And people often say, you know, like, oh, like, as if you didn't have an earlier relationship. Like, what were you doing? I always hear, like, what were you doing, like, in school or fresh out of school? Like, why
playing with Pokemon cards, probably.
Like, why didn't you have that? And I said, well, why should I have that? You know, what's the rush? Things should happen for you when they feel like they're meant to happen. And there's no need to just have that relationship because you feel like you need to do that. And the same goes for a single phase. On the flip side, people feel like because maybe they have been in a relationship in their late teens and earlier 20s, and then they might get out of it. So many people feel like they need that single phase. They need to get out on the town and be getting with X amount of people and be going on this amount of dates and be doing the trips to tell the stories about how many people they got with in the night. And that is not for everyone. That is by no means a rite of passage. You got to do what is good for you. You might feel like that is something that absolutely disgusts you. And if your single phase means just being with yourself and not worrying about putting yourself out there so much and only doing that when you feel necessary, which is absolutely what it should be, then that is great. And we need to discourage falling into the trap of listening to your mates telling you to get over them, to get under them, to get over them rather, and to get out there and get with people before you lock yourself down with someone else. That's just the worst commentary you can tell your mates, and something that I'm very critical of with those single phase talk, because honestly, that's where people find themselves in hot water, by not doing the things that they need to do to recover, to heal, to then be really good for their next relationship and to show up well in their next relationship.
You never do well in life when you do things that others want you to do. I mean, like literally the top 5 regret of the dying was, I wish I had lived a life truer to myself, not one that was expected of me by others. I also think about it as well as like, not everyone should get married. Not everyone should have kids. Now, I think probably for majority of people, it's a great thing to do, but there are a subsect of people in this world that they would benefit more from not cohabitating, getting married and having kids. And they might just not have that capacity to be a good parent. They might not have the capacity to be in a monogamous relationship. I don't think that's for most people, but I think because of, you know, socially it's very encouraged to get married, have kids, and I think it's a wonderful thing to do, and I think that is a very valuable rite of passage. But to pretend and say that's right for everyone, I disagree. I think there's a reason why we have such high divorce rates. I think there's a reason why there's so many kids who come from really challenging home environments, is because certain people weren't meant to be parents and they were made irresponsible life decisions. And I think that there should be more conversations around that. I don't think everyone should be in that sort of setup. I think it's getting an understanding of what you want and not being ashamed of it. You know, I think if you were to ask someone like, do you want kids or not? It's much more common and popular to say, yeah, I'd love to have kids, just maybe not at this phase of my life. But haven't really met that many people who are like, you know what, I don't want kids, and they're not unashamed to say it. Now, I don't really care. It's your life, it's your choice. But I've noticed that people are way more reluctant to talk about those things because it's socially, you know, unacceptable in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, it's just completely different. It's going against the grain. But one thing that keeps coming up on my feeds recently, and is something that is, I guess, quite trendy at the moment on social media, is the whole thing about nobody actually gives a fuck about you. Nobody cares about you. And that's not in a rude way. That's actually in a very liberating way. It's telling you that you can do whatever you want. You can not do whatever you want, and no one actually cares. Yeah, there might be that 5 seconds of passing conversation where the person might say, did you hear that they didn't do this or that they did do that? But then that 5 seconds goes by and it is completely forgotten about, and people are too much fixated on their own lives, and it is just a 5-second table chat at the end of the day. So I think it's something that it's a point that we can take away from this episode, and you guys can take away, is that like, nobody actually gives a fuck about what you do. Nobody really cares. People are so fixated on their own lives. They're so fixated on what people are going to say about that sweater they're wearing when they go to uni that day. They're so fixated on that pimple that might be on their forehead, or that little strand of hair that might be out of place. That these are all just things that people are going to notice about themselves, and they actually don't really notice about you at the end of the day. So be liberated and feel that liberation and do whatever the fuck you want. If it means standing in front of a camera on TikTok and talking about your love for trains, which I often joke about.
I reckon I should start a burner account, even though I don't even know that much about trains. I like my planes more, to be honest.
Oh, well, what would your burner account be about?
It'd be 777. It'd be 787s. It'd be Airbus's A380s. It'd be, you know, detailing the routes of certain airplanes, like, you know, the route from Melbourne to Los Angeles, how much fuel is burnt.
Well, there you go. There's something that I didn't actually quite know about you, Ilan, and it's a love for planes. And this is where some people might just be hiding their love for a certain thing.
Yeah,
and it's that whole judgment of, well, it's different and it's going against the grain and it's going against that whole rite of passage. But there's maybe so much that is hidden in a lot of us that we're just scared to break free and talk about because it's different.
Yeah, I think the better you get at the skill of not giving a shit about being true to yourself, and when I say true to yourself, being unashamedly happy to promote what you actually like to do, the better it is. You shouldn't ever be ashamed of what you enjoy doing, right? Assuming it's not Jeffrey Dahmer mass murdering. But for most things, if you've got certain hobbies, just because it's not the trendy hobby, just because it's not high rocks, just because it's not fucking CrossFit or going to run clubs doesn't mean it's not a hobby worth pursuing.
Exactly. And look, honestly, take us for an example here. I feel like at the start, we still get so much, like, I feel criticism and hear whispers from people around us at times about, what we should do or what we shouldn't do or how to do this and how to do that. But in the grand scheme of things, I feel like it's only really been positive feedback about, good on you for sticking fat with something that you enjoy. Good on you for surpassing 100 episodes and cracking on with doing something that you enjoy. That is hard. That is different. That not everyone is necessarily doing, albeit a lot of people have podcasts these days. But to have 100 plus podcasts is one of the rarer feats. And people respect seeing people admire, seeing people persevere with something that they are passionate about. So really, it doesn't matter how niche it is about what that thing is that you enjoy doing. People will judge you at the start. People will criticize you and they'll forever do so. But once they see that you actually persevere with something, it's admirable and they wish that they probably did it themselves.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think a lot of times we've stripped the skill of being able to like criticize someone, but also respect them at the same time for their hustle and the effort. It's like, I always see it in fighting, like MMA fighters have that really good skill of, I don't like him, but he's a great fighter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think we've lost a little bit of that. It's a lot of all or nothing. But I do say thank you to our 4 followers who have listened to us since episode 1. Your listens have been what keeps us going, but I'm taking the piss, of course. I'm sure there's many more of you guys, as our stats would indicate. But yeah, on that note, guys, I hope if there is one thing to take out of this episode, it is the idea that just because other people determine something as a rite of passage and that you need to reach it by some form of arbitrary deadline, you absolutely don't. You do it when you're ready and when you're comfortable, and you do it because you want to do it. Never feel like you need to do something out of obligation. Do it because you truly want to. And if you can apply that litmus test to most things in your life, you'll have a more fulfilling and hopefully more clear understanding of how to spend your time. And
you'll ultimately not regret your decisions at the end of the day.
Nah.
Who ever regretted doing something because they wanted to do it? No matter how weird or abstract it was, nobody has ever regretted something that they wanted to do. It's rather on the flip side. They regretted something that maybe they wanted to do but didn't actually do. Because if they have experienced something and they did do something that they wanted to do, but they didn't actually feel successful and fulfilled with it, oftentimes they'll come out and say that they actually just learned something from it and it changed them and it provided some positivity and feedback to them in a way in which they wouldn't have had if they had not done it. So often there's no regret with doing the things that people want to do. It's the regret of not doing those things.
100%. And not doing them earlier as well.
Exactly.
On that note, guys, we hope you have enjoyed this week's episode. Do give us a 5-star rating. It does help us out immensely. On that note, we'll see you next week. Ciao.
Bye.